Get him!
What for? He hasn't done anything yet.
Quick, Brutus, put him in.
See? I told you! Now capture him!
Which one?
I don't care which one! Get them both!
That man's an imposter. That man is the imposter.
Wild Hearts is an action role-playing game developed by Megaforce and published by Electronic Arts. You play as a hunter, a visitor to the land of Azuma. Azuma is home to multiple monsters called kimono, large beasts that roam the land and fight each other for territory. It is your job as the hunter to take down these kimono and take back the land from these beasts and bring peace to the people of Azuma.
Many see kimono as a threat, nature at its most fierce. So you strive to protect. A motive shared by the hunters of old, and the reason behind much of what they developed.
The story was a very basic one and really nothing special, which is okay for the most part, especially since the main focus of the game is the monsters and the gameplay. The game starts off with a pretty decent character customization with a lot of options and sliders that allows you to create the character exactly how you want them, which is always welcomed, even though if you are not the host of the co-op lobby, you will not see your character in any of the cutscenes as it will always be the host's character, even if sometimes you'll still hear your character's grunts over top of the host's character.
You can swim in cutscenes.
Oh.
You have a man. You're huffing like a man. You're huffing like my character on my...
He's alive!
You picked your gender at the beginning of the game?
I've been in 0 fucking cutscenes.
Another issue I had was the game allows you to pick a voice for your character, and outside things set in combat, your character will never talk in any of the dialogue sections, which always annoys me because what's the point of choosing a voice for your character if the character is mostly a silent protagonist? Speaking of voice acting, the voice acting for majority of the characters was lackluster. There were a couple characters, including the character who sold trinkets in the city, that didn't even sound like he wanted to be there.
Yes. Alright.
Goodbye then. I've got some new ideas to improve your
Wait,
sorry
what just
life.
happened? Oh, that was
If you're
weird.
interested, here's what I can make. Take a pick.
That kid doesn't give a flying fuck about voice acting. I could have
Goodbye,
voiced
then.
that character. This game could be played in up to 4-player co-op or solo that I thought in general was rather fun. The game does allow for co-op story progression. If you and the other players in your party are at the same point in the game's story, you retain any story progress you make when returning to solo play, but if the host is further into the story, only the host gets credit for the story progression, so keep that in mind when you're trying to set up your co-op playthrough. Beyond that, I think the game had some cool monsters that were more visually pleasing than Monster Hunter World in my opinion. Where I feel like the game falters is there were not enough monsters and a third of them were just reskins of the other monsters. Like if you look at Monster Hunter World for example, that game has 34 monsters and only 6 of them are reskins. But with Wild Hearts, the game has 21 monsters, and 7 of them are reskins, so a third of the monsters are reskins, which is kind of disappointing. I just feel like in a game that focuses primarily on the monsters, they need to do a better job to add more variety to keep the game more exciting, since the players are already going to have a big grind to do to get the gear that they want. Another issue I had with the game is the weather effects. They were awful. Falling snow and rain just looks terrible and looks straight out of the PS2 era, which is inexcusable in a AAA game in 2023. So beyond the story, when playing a hunter-type game, one of the most important aspects of these games is the gameplay. And I think that this game is a mixed bag when it comes to the gameplay, to be honest. One thing I really loved about the gameplay is the building mechanics of the game called Karakuri. To be able to build things like a firework to knock down flying enemies, or a giant hammer to bring down on the enemies' heads, really adds an aspect to this style of game that we haven't really seen before, and it is a welcomed addition. But on the flip side of that, some parts of the building gave us issues. For example, you need 6 torches to create a firework. And there would be times where you go to create these items and you would place 3 torches and the game would tell you that you can't place the item here, which could really screw you over if you're trying to place it before the enemy attacks. Yes, you can move over to step and keep placing the item, but by that point it could be too late, especially with how persistent some of the monsters can be. Another thing that was frustrating about the game is a lack of animation canceling during combat. If you go to drink a health potion, or if you already triggered your attack motion and the enemy jumps up into the air or does some sort of other attack, you can't cancel your current animation to move out of the way, so you just kind of have to stand there and take it. This is something I think is important, especially in a game like this where every move you make is important and could be the difference between success and dying. Another thing added to the game that helped in combat was the talismans. The talismans had multiple unique buffs such as raising final blow stats, raising health, and increasing resistance to elementals, just to name a few, that really added additional help when out on the hunt. Overall, even though there were some issues we ran into, I think the gameplay was solid and pretty fun. Farming the monsters for better gear and weapons was something we never got bored of and enjoyed all the way through. Speaking of gear, each monster has its own set of gear, and in some cases, especially later on in the game, the gear has 2 monsters combined. This is where most of your time is spent, grinding the monsters to get the best gear in the game to allow you to take on that next harder boss. Once you have the monster's base gear, there is also additional upgrades with 2 different paths, a human and a kimono path, which you will also have to do an additional grind for of these same monsters to get these upgrades. These upgrades were very promising, but most of the good buffs were on the kimono gear path, so we kind of found ourselves usually upgrading that path throughout the playthrough. For the most part, I liked the gear and thought it added enough of a variation that it makes the players want to grind to get the fully upgraded gear, which is important in a game like this. The weapons in the game are also pretty cool. We primarily use the katana swords, but for people who want to switch it up, there are also other weapons the players can choose from, such as Karakuri's staff, a bow and arrow, and an umbrella, for example. There are 4 more options that can be unlocked later on in the game, so keep that in mind too. The weapons felt really solid with good animations, and outside the lack of animation canceling that we talked about before, I really enjoyed the weapon play in this game and the sound design that went with each one of them. These weapons can also be upgraded just like the armor by grinding monsters and getting certain parts from said monsters, and this will allow you to upgrade to a more powerful version of the weapon, which is necessary, especially as you start to run into stronger enemies later in the game. In the end, I think this game has a very solid foundation with all the potential in the world to grow into a much better game. I love the monsters that was in the game, but I think they need to add new monster types to make sure it doesn't feel like most of them are just reskins of other monsters. Outside the lack of animation canceling, I thought the gameplay was awesome, and it was a big strength of this game, which is important as outside the monsters, that is the most important aspect of a hunter-style game. This isn't a perfect game by any means, the weather effects need to be much better, and the final boss being forced single player is something I am not a huge fan of when any game does it, considering you can play the whole game in co-op after the tutorial, all the way up to that point. But there is also a lot of fun to be had here, and with some patches and some new content, this game could easily be even better. But as it stands right now, I am giving Wild Hearts a 7 out of 10. With more monster types and quality of life improvements, I think this game could easily be an 8 or even a 9, even with the weak story. The developers have already released a few patches to help try to correct some of these issues, so hopefully they keep adding content and keep correcting some of the technical issues that we found during our playthrough, and that would really take this game to the next level. But what did you guys think of Wild Hearts? Did you like it more or less than I did? Let me know in the comments section below. But that's going to do it for this review. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.